Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who might be hearing this as part of the Temple Beth Am podcast series. Good morning from frigid Los Angeles, or maybe say frigid Pilch Hall in Los Angeles.
Warmer outside.
It is. There's something wacky's going on here. So we're all bundled up here, drinking hot toddies and ready to begin a Rashi class. We are on chapter 6. I believe in the middle of we finished the Rashi on verse 23. Hold on, I'm just going to rearrange something here. Okay. Is the sound okay, Diane? Can you hear me on Zoom? I hope so. That's okay. So we read verse 23 and the interesting Rashi that, as I said before, the comment the Rashi we read last time, the one we're going to read today, all stems from an interesting page of Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin. We're going to look more into that today to see how the Talmud deals with this originally, and then we can kind of watch the process as Rashi culls that and turns that into a singular commentary. But let's read verse 23 to remind ourselves we are. Hector, can you? I'm not seeing the screen up there. My computer. I don't know if I'm doing anything wrong. Is it this? Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Still getting used to this setup. Exactly, like just to where to position the microphone and my computer and my book. Okay. So chapter 6, verse 23 was Vayikach Aharon et Elisheva bat Aminadav achot Nachshon lo lisha. So Aaron, as we're learning these genealogies and learning the spouses and the children of some, but not everyone, and we've kind of seen a pattern that we're kind of spinning out these micro genealogies whenever there's someone at the end of it that is eventually going to become interesting to us. Aaron took as a wife, I'm rearranging the words in English, Elisheva, who was the daughter of Aminadav. We also find out that it was the brother of Nachshon, a sister of Nachshon. And she gave birth to him, and the results were Nadav and Avihu, and Elazar and Itamar. And the question, of course, is why is his brother-in-law interesting? And Rashi, culling from that page in Masechet Sanhedrin, basically says, that if you're going to marry someone, you need to look at the person's brother. And then in the Talmud, they added an extra line because they believed back then that the nephew and the uncle are akin, right? So if you want to get a sense of who your son's going to be, and in that society that was most significant, look at your wife's brother, and that will give you some indication as to who's going to come in the next generation. So make sure, right? It's almost more important to check your wife's brother according to this than your wife itself, right? Okay, that's where we left off. Any lingering questions of that before we learn verse 24? It's not until we get to verse 25 that we'll have another thing that will connect back to that page of the Talmud. Anyone? We did plummet for a long time last time. All right, so let's go to verse 24. Barry, you want to read verse 24, Uvnei Korach? Oh, we need a microphone, Barry.
Uvnei Korach, Asir ve'ela Alkana ve'asaf, Ela mishpachot hakarchi.
Rick, can you hear on that? Could you hear Barry?
Hear what? Yes, I can hear him. Yes, I can hear him with the microphone. Thank you.
Barry, translate.
The sons of Korach, Asir, Alkana, and Ahiasaph. These are the families of the Korachites.
Okay, so we as we went down the genealogy, we got to Korach. We learned Korach's 3 sons, and then it kind of a little coda. These are the families, these are the clans that emerged from Korach. Simple verse in terms of content, simple verse in terms of grammar. Doesn't mean that no one has a question on it. Anyone want to? And Rashi's quiet on the verse. Anybody want to add or ask anything on that verse? No?
I'm just wondering if this is the first family that we actually have the family name as a tribal name, Korchi.
As an adjective?
Yeah, thank you. That's what I meant, as an adjective.
We're definitely going to get that in the book of Numbers, because they're the Gershuni and Kehati and Merari. It's hard to add an E onto Merari.
It's the first time
In
here.
this list, it looks like we haven't adjectivized any of these names. Correct. What do you want to, now that you've noted that, what do you want to say about that, Larry?
Well, it's just interesting that they merit having their family become, and the name become an adjective, as opposed to simply calling them the sons of Korach.
Right.
So you got Livaim would be another one, which is coming up. But so maybe it's because of the importance of the family.
Yeah. Right. I mean, if you go look back to verse 19, where it could have said, Eila mishpachot halevi'i, it was Eila mishpachot halevi letoldotam, right? So there are several ways of like concluding each of these ideas. And yeah, it did not occur to me that this is the first adjectivization of a name. Mishpachot hakarchi.
No, it's not.
Right, but it's an adjective in the sense that the word karchi, which is in smichut, means the right. It's adjectival noun, a korachite, a korachite as an actual noun, correct? Mishpachot hakarchi, correct? Not mishpachot karchiot. Anything else in that verse before we look at the next one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. There's a song. There's something wrong with the mic? I'm hearing static.
We hear you. We hear you
Just fine. Really? There's a wow.
I hear the static too, Rick.
Yeah. Okay. It even sounds like there's somebody competing, like there's a party line or something. I was going to bring up, there's this psalm. Oh my God. There's a psalm in Pukei Zimra, right?
Hold on one second. Rick,
Yeah.
can you turn down the speakers a little bit? Okay. I'll try again, Rick.
Hi. Oh, much better. No, it's still there. There's the psalm that is from the Uvanei Korah. I thought there might be something there we could look at. They survived the trauma in the wilderness, right? Oh my God. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, but you're not having an easy time.
No. Every time I speak, there's static, and it's not my voice coming back to me. It's something else.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, me too.
Problem speaking on the Zoom in this setup.
Maybe I should go out and come back. But Renee's hearing it too. I don't know.
Do the best you can.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a psalm, Uvanei Korah, right? The Korah children.
Yeah.
I thought maybe there'd be something there that we could use. Maybe it mentions Exodus or something, no? I don't know.
While you're looking,
Yeah.
we could, of course, study any psalm we want. But while you're looking, we'll go to the next.
Go ahead.
Okay. Barry, verse 25.
Velazar ben Acharon l'lechachlo, minod patielo isha, v'teled lo et Pinchas, ele rashi avot halavim l'mishpachotam.
Okay. Translate if you can.
Eleazar, the son of Aaron, took for himself one of the daughters of Putiel for a wife, and she bore him Pinchas. These are the heads of the Levites, patriarchs, according to their family.
Okay, so we've trickled down from Levi to Aaron to Eleazar, Eleazar marrying someone from the daughters of Putiel, and the next generation is Pinchas. So once again, we've gotten to a genealogy where at the end of it is someone who's going to become interesting later on. Pinchas, the grandson of Elazar, and of Aaron, and the great grandson of Amram, and then great of Levi himself. Okay, so anything jump out at you at this verse worthy of a question? Anyone? Remember, if you're going to ask, just grab a microphone first.
Well, we're getting the genealogy of Pinchas.
Right, so this does bring us to Pinchas, and Pinchas has become a significant person in the book of Bamidbar, and we can find out whom he's related to. We've also noted that Pinchas and Korach are they first cousins. I don't think I have it right in front of me,
Yeah.
but this is the family that's going to become interesting in the desert is related to one another. Rick, something is going on with Rick. I'll undo that. Okay. Hi, Millie. Any other questions on this verse? I see Alan, and then I see Rebecca, and then I see Rachel.
It says Mibnot Putiel, from the daughters of Putiel, but they don't give the wife's name. So why do they just say the daughters of Putiel and not the name of the wife?
Right. There's so much about that phrasing which is worthy of a question. So first of all, we don't know the name in the same way, well, not in the same way. In the previous verse, we learned an interesting family connection to Elisheva, that she was the sister of Nachshon, but at least we got her name. Here, we don't have the woman's name. What else is interesting about this phrasing?
Well, it's the daughters, yeah.
Right, it's a category. Like, so he married into, you know those famous daughters of Putiel? Well, Elazar got one of them. And what's odd even about that? Maybe on the most basic level. Huh? Who's Putiel? Right? It seems to be that if we're going to make a reference to the daughters of someone, then the someone should be so knowable that we'll say, that's why it's significant that we learn this, because this is the daughters of Putiel. Who cares what her name was? He got a Putiel daughter, right? How impressive. Or maybe the reverse. He was stuck with a Putiel daughter. But Putiel is totally foreign to us, right? But it's the word, the verse is listed without self-consciousness, or it's written without self-consciousness, as if there's nothing odd about this. But there's oddness in that she's not named. There's oddness in that she's one of a group, and that the person that she's the daughter of is not someone who is interesting or known to us. Okay? Leonard? Good. So that JPS kind of academic understanding of Putiel is going to be a wonderful counterpoint to how the rabbis are going to deal with it, just like heads up, right? You've heard the term notrikun, right? Where the rabbis take a word that may or may not have a Hebrew origin, and they break it down into two words as if Hebrew is the source. Something similar is going on here. You could be sure that since we're introduced to a name that we don't know about, the rabbis are going to give us a reason behind this name, and the reason is going to be colorful and interesting, okay? So that's, I'm leading the witness a little bit, but that's where the direction we're going in. Any other questions on the verse before we get into the Rashi? Larry. Larry needs a mic.
Can you just repeat what Leonard said, because we didn't hear you?
What Leonard said is that JPS basically says that Putiel doesn't seem to be a Hebrew name, Hebrew word. It seems to be a hybrid between Hebrew and ancient Egyptian. El, God, Puti, some ancient Egyptian word. And that Pinchas apparently also has Egyptian origins. Okay. Everyone on the table, if you're speaking to the mic, see how close my mouth is? You have to get that close or they won't hear you. That also helps, yes. There are a lot of factors here. Yes.
So my comment is I see a consistency here in terms of emphasizing the names that are going to come up in the future, which is the case here of Pinchas. But I wanted to read the short entry by Alter, which goes along the lines of what we've been discussing. Putiel, Pinchas. These are the two names in the list of Egyptian origin, though Putiel has a Semitic theophoric suffix.
Of course.
El. I guess that's the theophoric is El. We might infer that taking a wife from the daughters of Putiel suggests that Elazar's marriage is exogamous, another indication that the Hebrews were not altogether segregated from the Egyptians.
Exogamous meaning intermarried. as opposed to endogamy, which is intramarriage.
And thus the wife might understandably give an Egyptian name to their son. Later, this possible product of intermarriage will show himself to be a fierce zealot on behalf of the Israelite purity.
That's a wonderful kind of armchair psychologizing of Pinchas's character based on his potential family origins and the mixed nature, right? That the offspring of the mixed relationship became a zealot for one side against the other. Interesting. Okay. Anything else on this before we look at the Rashi?
The one word that was used,
Alan?
the one word that was used,
Theophoric.
is that when you add something to make the name of God included in your name?
I guess so. It was a theophoric suffix. So the suffix is the thing that is added to it. Theo, God, phoric. I don't know what phoric means in the word metaphoric.
Yeah.
But it basically means that. I don't know why it means that.
Okay, because in our Siddur class, Rabbi Avivi was talking about this in one of the Psalms about adding the names, and there's certain names that end in the name of God, or even that Joshua's name, it was added, they added letters to it to become, to indicate that God's name is included
Right.
within the name itself. So
Right.
and he used a word that I didn't hear then. I think it may have been something like
Theophoric.
theophoric.
Could be. Right. That Hosea was turned into Yehoshua. The idea being that he called him that as a pet name to suggest that he believed that Joshua could be godly or already was godly, or may he be godly. Yehoshua, correct.
Your name is Lan, and you have a theophoric prefix, Lan.
Oh, my.
Okay. On that note, Barry, read the Rashi, please, on Mibnot Putiel. He needs a microphone. Close to it. You gotta go closer, Barry. No one will hear anything.
I would move it.
Thank you.
How's that?
Better.
Is it okay? All right. Mibno Petiel, Mizeva Yitro, Sheptain, Agalim, Lavoda, Zera.
Okay, pause right there. So the Rashi's first answer, and then we're going to look at the Talmudic source in a second, but let's just see how Rashi first digests it. Mizera Yitro, what's Zera here mean?
So a descendant of.
Right, it's from the seed of Jethro, meaning a descendant of. And now Rashi's gonna describe Jethro in a way that is a play on the puti of the Putiel. And the puti is pei tet. So Jethro, who was pitem agalim lavuda zara. Anyone know what the Hebrew word lifatem means in the PL? I'm gonna pull it up on the Zoom, at least see how Joshua understands it. You would think it's not related to pitom, although there's the visual that you can connect to in a second. So this is Jastro on patam. So this is one of the words where what binyan the root falls into changes the meaning. So in the pa'al, liftom, potem, it means either to crush or to pound, or to expand or make large, or, hold on to this one, to fatten, okay? Before we look at the pitem, anyone have an association in their mind in liturgy or anywhere else in the word pitem or pitom? Aside from that, where there's an aleph in the middle of that word.
Isn't Pitom suddenly?
Also, a different root that's pei taf aleph, peta, or ayin. Pitum hakatoret. Anyone come across that? It's in. We don't say it out loud in our davening, but it's at the end, usually of a Shabbat morning service at an Israel and a weekday service. It's a list of all of the spices that went into making the incense, right, in the temple. And there's a whole list of it, and it's a Mishnah, and it appears usually before the last Kaddish Rabban. At the end of our services, we go to a mourner's Kaddish. We don't do Amar Rebbe Elazar, all that stuff. But in many services, after Aleinu, before mourner's Kaddish, you have an extra section, and then a Kaddish Rabbanan, and then something, and then mourner's Kaddish. And in that first section is Pitum HaKatoret, the arrangement of the spices of the incense. Right, Barry?
Or the end of the esrog.
Right, I think that's probably an accident, but it's the same sounding word. I think there's an aleph in that word in a pitom. Okay, so that's patam in the pa'al, but this is pitam. Rashi uses pitam, which means it's in the PL form. It has several different meanings. To pound spices, like the compounded incest, pitum hakatoret, right? And then if you go down to number 2, to fatten or to cram. Look at the source here. In Breshit Rabbah, Genesis R, it's a play on Potiphar. So elsewhere, we've got another Poti. I didn't even make the connection. Leonard, now your comment is even more interesting because Poti and Potiphar also has the Poti beginning. That's clearly an Egyptian name. I never made a connection between Putiel and Potiphar. So in Breshit Rabbah, there's a word game on Potiphar. And what's the word game? Shahaya mifatem agalim avodah zarah. That he would fatten cows, lifatem to fatten up for avodah zarah, to make them nice and juicy for their idolatry. And then we've got nearly a Jastro jackpot. It's a reference to somewhere else in Talmudic literature where Putiel's name is being discussed. Reitem ben Puti. Do you see that the son of Puti, Shepitem Aviv Imo, whose grandfather Avi Imo fattened up calves? Okay, so go back into what we've got here in Rashi. We're saying that why is it called Potiphar? Why is it called Putiel? Because he was a descendant of Yitro, and Yitro, at least before the Midrashic notion that he converted to Israelite religion, was a idolatrous priest, and he would spend his time fattening up his cows for the sacrifice. What kind of a, I don't know, nickname is the wrong word. What kind of a way of describing Yitro is it to say that he fattened up cows for avodah zarah? Is it a praise? Is it a critique? Is it a description? In what way is it slander, Larry? It does make you think of foie gras.
Foie gras. I'm not sure it's related to foie gras, but he's fattening up animals for avodah zarah, for idolatrous sacrifice, and it's not a nice thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. The question is, it's not a nice thing from our perspective. If one is already an idolater, does it change one's sense of the idolater to know that they're preparing animals for sacrifice? Is that making it worse, or is it just an insult saying, remember, folks, however much Yitro gets involved in our story, at the core he was an idolater, and his idolatrous seed got into our system?
So I don't know the Midrash at all, and this is rather shocking to me because I thought that Yitro was somebody who knew Hashem, who knew Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So if he knew God intimately, and he's still participating in this idolatrous sacrifice or fattening the animals for it, he's kind of a hypocrite.
Right.
So
Well, just pause 1 second. Whatever he is, it's all happening in the imagination of these rabbis, right? The rabbis are starting with a name they don't understand, and they're searching their Rolodex. What does it sound like? What does it sound like? What does it sound like? What can I connect to? And so it's an opportunity to give a mini sermonette. And the question is, what's the mini sermonette? Is the mini sermonette, all idolaters are the same and they foie gras their animals and they treat them poorly? Is the mini sermonette that however much Yitro is going to become important in the story, just remember he was an idolater at the core, and therefore in the family becomes a descendant of it? We're not sure. I don't know the answer, but I think that's the question. Elon, and then Alan, and then I think say Rick's hand.
Yeah, it would seem to me that the fattening of the calves is not a negative here, because clearly our ancestors had no problem fattening up the calves for sacrifice. I think it's the idolatrous worship that's the issue.
Right.
I think the fattening of the calves is incidental. Yeah, he fattened up the calves for idolatrous worship.
Right. It seems like the word fattening here is just the way to link an odd name to, it's not even to Yitro's name, it's just to think of the number of verbs you can attach to any human being. So we found a verb. The verb is pitem. It's not even a great one because putiel the root is petaf, and pitam, to fatten up. The mem is sorry, petet. The mem is significant in the root, so it's not even a great verbal connection. But it seems that the connection is to get to yitro, and the way there is this verb fattening, but not that the problem itself is the fattening. What second, Alan and then Sue?
No, go ahead, Sue.
Well, the Putiel, it's almost like, well, his name is fattening up for the gods kind of thing, even though it's El, not Elohim. But Putiel, it's like this is his name because this is what he did exactly.
So that you're saying that the wordplay might not just be on the puti part, but the el part. He was a for God fattener,
Right.
yeah, or for their gods fattener.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But to make it for their gods factor would seem more of a diminishment, because as Larry was alluding to, Yitro was viewed as a hero. He was the one who advised Moses how to be able to handle the judicial system so he'd have more time to focus what was going to take place. He was the one who did all these good things, and to describe him as someone who's just going to fatten the sacrifices for Avodah Zarah, after being so connected with Yitro and with and I think there's some midrashim that really go into how great Yitro was, and they talk about, Yoter and more, and what was going to be rearranged, and all the things that he was doing. They don't come readily to mind now, but he's viewed as a righteous Gentile, so to speak, in that sense, in a very positive way. And to say that his job, his connection was to fatten animals for sacrifice for Avodah Zarah is the problem.
Yeah. It's a helpful thing to be reminded occasionally that rabbinic literature is so vast and so varied that to ask rabbinic literature to answer to itself, right, to be consistent within itself, is an impossibility, right? We can't even, I gave this Josh this past Shabbat, we can't even be consistent inside one person. And rabbinic literature is representing the wisdom traditions of hundreds of sages over hundreds of years, right? So it's possible to have a midrashic thrust that goes in this direction that is countermanded by a midrashic thrust in another generation. One of the things that this is countermanded by, there is halachic material in the Talmud and the Midrash that says that once a person, quote unquote, sees the light and converts to Judaism, you may never taunt that person or remind them about who they were beforehand, right? You can never say or taunt a non-Jew and talk about the trait that used to pass their lips, as if knocking them down. Once you've converted and you're a Jew with no asterisk, right? And in fact, the rabbis use that as a example of a sin called hona'at dvarim, to afflict someone with words, a version of afflicting someone with words, right? How do you actually cause damage with words? This is a way of doing it, by telling or speaking to or about a non-Jew, reminding them of their pre-Jewish, their pre-halachic past, right? Now, this is all anachronistic, because whatever Yitro did or didn't do, he didn't convert, right? So, and he didn't live in an era where there was a formal process. But this is the rabbi seemingly aware that there are other parts of the tradition that are going to raise up Yitro as almost one of us, a kind of reminder, well, he's not almost one of us, right? He's actually, what he was doing before he met us was the antithesis of what we want to do. He was, we're preparing our animals to sacrifice to the one God. He was doing it to the many gods, right? So could be just two different ideas within rabbis living in different cities across different centuries. There were a lot of hands up. Let me go to Rick first, and then I see the hands on the table. Rick, I hope you can hear yourself as you talk.
Me too. No, there's still static. But anyway, the rest of the Rashi, I just wanted to point out, I hear in the Yitzro, so I think Rashi is playing with us there. And then there's another P page. Yeah, I'm just saying that might add to the discussion.
Okay, but let's wait till we actually say that part out loud. Okay, Rosemary, give her a microphone, and then Rachel, and then Sue.
I was just referring to fattening part, because I think there's something good in doing that, because in Middle East, if we look, especially probably in those times more than now, the cows weren't or calves weren't so fat as it is in America. They are very tiny. They look sick almost. So if they are fattening, it's to present something good to God, not a sick cow. And we do that for turkeys in Thanksgiving.
Right.
A month before, they give them walnuts, and that fattens them very fast. And that's for economical thing that they become heavier. But it's not bad thing to fatten before even sacrifice.
Right. In a tradition where the goal is to offer something choice to your God on an altar, then having what you're offering being from the best that you can offer is a good thing. The question is this an entirely negative idea because it has to do with Avodah Zarah, or is this somehow saying that, when he was a priest to them, at least he was working hard, to expend more of his resources to fatten up his animals for Avodah Zarah. I have a hard time imagining that the rabbis can say anything praiseworthy about idolatry, but you're right, within a tradition where you're offering up your best to the gods, you might as well have your animals be more plump, right? Rachel, Sue, and then Barry.
Just a quick reminder in our discussion of Yitro. Yitro is one of the biblical characters whose name changes a few times in the story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall right this moment the other names.
Reuel and Chovav.
Okay. So in making the connection between Putiel and Yitro, would those additional dimensions or characters ascribed to Yitro have any relevance?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of it, but you're right. And the wordplay here is not on Yitro's name, but on something about his character. Although Rick made us wonder about the next phrase we're going to say, which is not about Yitro, but at least has a word that is reminiscent of Yitro's name. I don't see any obvious associations between Yitro's name and the two other names of Yitro, but maybe we can explore that. Sue, and then Barry. And then Barry will be the second half of the Rashi.
Maybe Putiel has already been kind of scrubbed. Like, if it, in fact, once they've converted and now they're, Israelites essentially, then, and he's among the Leviim, it might be that that's what he used to do, is stuff the calves for sacrifice for the gods, but for Avodah Zarah. But maybe it's Putiel. Maybe that's his job now. He's stuffing the calves for the one God.
I'm trying to follow your line of thinking. So by
Me too.
But no, I want to invest in it. So you're saying that if he's a descendant of, if who is it who married this? Is if Elazar married a daughter, the descendant of Putiel, married someone who has in his history to a different god, like a preparing for sacrifice expertise, and maybe that could be helpful. Maybe there's something semi-positive about this. Is what you're saying? That
Not just semi-positive.
A whitewashing of Putiel.
But that Putiel is a fit name.
Yeah.
It's that he's
Yeah. It's interesting. It's so hard to presume tone in Midrash, right? And it's certainly hard to presume tone in Rashi because he's so terse. I keep leading up to it. We're gonna see at least one of the Talmudic sources where this comes from, where the tone is a little clear, right? Rashi is totally flat here. There's no way of inferring if he's doing it snidely. Is he sneering? Is it flat? Or is he somehow backhandedly praising this marriage because, hey, we've got someone who's got an expertise in preparing animals for sacrifice. Maybe that's not a terrible thing for us. It's hard to know, right? Who is next? Rachel? No, Barry was next. So, but Rachel, go ahead, Rachel, and then we'll go to Barry.
I don't know what the big thing is all about. It's very clear later in the Torah that Yitro was a priest of Midian. So I mean, he's a big shot priest of Midian. That's what they do. But Yeah.
Well, early, we've already met that when we met Yitro early on in the book of in Parshat Shemot.
So where would he cool? He's a big guy.
He is indeed. Rachel?
I just wanted to get back to the point about the plurality of banot. And are there other references to wives in the plural like that? Because that is just something I think is worth exploring more.
Yeah, there are notes so and so in several different times in the book of Breshit when Rivka is upset that Esav married daughters from married people from the daughters of this tribe. So that does happen occasionally in the text. Barry, why don't you read the second half of the Rashi after Avodah Zarah?
It says where Mizerah Yosef.
Okay, so read that.
Mizerah Yosef. Shapit Peit B'Yitzro.
Okay, so maybe Putiel is from the offspring of Yitro, and the connection is Putiel Pitam. He was a calf fattener, or maybe Putiel was a descendant of Yosef. That's better. And what's the word play on Yosef? That Yosef was Pete Pate Yitro.
Pete Pate.
Anyone know what Pete Pate means?
I have word contempt.
Let's see what Jastro says. Forgot to pull that up 1 second. Okay, Pete Pate. Okay. And Sue, do you know how it's used in modern Hebrew, lefat pate? It's to chatter. It's to chatter about someone, and usually, yeah, it's a version of gossip, right? But in rabbinic Hebrew, it's not necessarily that at all. So Pete Pate, Pete, where are you? Where are you, Pete Pate? The first one is that to talk to babble. The second one, to talk or argue with one's own passion, to conquer oneself. And we've got another partial Jastro jackpot because it shows you all the places where this wordplay appears. Because Rashi is quoting apparently from Sanhedrin, page 10, but we saw that there was another reference before, and here apparently in Bava Batra, page 109b, there's another explication of Benot Putiel. So let's just understand the words, that he's called Putiel because he was the offspring of Yosef, because Yosef, what did he do? He talked or argued with his own passion, and he conquered oneself. What's the reference, Alan?
That's for Potiphar's wife when he resisted himself. Potiphar's wife, which makes it all the more meaningful because there's a play on Potiphar as well with respect to these same words.
Right. So the reference is to the midrashic expansion of Yosef's self-control to reject or to at least not give in to the temptation of Potiphar's wife. And so Yosef was a Pete Pater, right? Or one of his children was going to be called Putiel, obviously. I mean, it's a silly association, a silly connection, right? The connection to Potiphar is really interesting, particularly because you can imagine that Potiphar also could have been called someone who was Mifat Pitam because he was an idolater as well. And Yosef, this is a strong notion. He was able to talk to his own instincts and say, you calm yourself down, right? He was able to get out of his brainstem and use his prefrontal cortex to tell himself that he's not going to submit to this temptation, okay? So this is a very positive thing. So it's unclear, as Rashi's saying, that these daughters of Putiel, that Putiel was a descendant of Yitro, or Yosef, or both. What do you think he's saying, Joel?
I just have a footnote that says the reason Rashi does this is because there's an extra yod in Putiel, so therefore it's pei taf. There's multiple pei tafs. Putiel is usually without the yuds, but you put the yud in, it makes it a plural.
It makes it for a double drosh. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at the piece of Talmud. I forgot everyone, I didn't share the screen for the last piece of Jastrow, so I apologize. So we looked at this piece of Talmud last time also, but now we're looking above it because the way that Rashi quotes the material is in the opposite order of how it appears actually in the text. So Bava Batra, end of 109, B, beginning of 110a. Gotta look kind of this whole section. They're trying to figure out who Pinchas is. In the Talmud, right, the Rashi is culling from material that is not answering the individual question that we were looking at in the text, trying to figure out who Pinchas is. U'Pinchas lav mi Yitro ate, Pinchas, the descendant of Yitro, v'hakativ says, Elazar ben Aaron lakach lo mibnot Putiel lo lisha. Elazar, this is our verse, the son of Aaron, took for as a wife from the daughters of Putiel. My love da'ate mi Yitro. Does this not mean that Pinchas, who's going to descend from this family, came from Yitro, who was Pitem Agalim Avodah Zarah, who fattened up calves for Avodah Zarah? No, da'ate mi Yosef. I disagree. The Talmud disagrees with itself. He came from Yosef. What's the play on the word? Shepitpeit b'Yitro, that he resisted the desires by talking down to his own Yetzer Hara. Pitpeit means to talk to your instincts, to battle them down. I added the word resisted, right? The word means to chatter, but here it means that Yosef had an internal dialogue, right? You know the cartoons of the angel and the devil on your shoulder? He had an internal dialogue, and he chatted it out, and by the end of that chatting, he realized, I'm not going to give in.
I misunderstood completely.
There's another play on that, Rabbi, that in the sense of I think it's in Yoma where how is Joseph able to resist this?
His father's
He saw
image.
the face of his father, and that's what convinced him not to succumb to Potiphar's wife.
So in some ways, this midrash in Yosef is more praiseworthy of Yosef because he had the material inside himself to resist rather than rely on a prophetic, oracle from his father. Larry?
So it's clearly not Joseph's inclination to chatter.
No. It's Yosef's, at least in this much, it's Yosef's successful negotiation chatter with himself to not give in to what was probably a very tempting offer. Yeah. The Talmud continues, Balosh Fatim Mivazimoto. But didn't the tribes make fun of him? And Omrim, this is trying to go back to maybe it's Yitro, not Yosef. Don't we know that they would denigrate Pinchas and say about him, and Omrim, Reitem ben Puti, look at this Puti offspring. Ben Shepitem Avi Imo Agalim Labodah Zarah, whose mother's father fattened up calves for idolatry. Yaharog Nasi Shevet MiYisrael, would such a person, because it's now about Pinchas, kill a prince of the tribe of Israel? Ella I avu di'imei miYosef, imei di'imei miYitro. This is how it's going to resolve both of them. If his mother's father was a Josephite, then his mother's mother was a Yitroite. And if you want to reverse it, fine. If his mother's father came from Yitro, his mother's mother came from Yosef. And you can learn this. This is what Joel is referring to. Daikanami. Daikanami means if you look closely, the thing you think might be right is proven in the text itself. Literally means be specific also, like lidayek, to be explicit. Ichtiv mibnot Putiel, because it says the daughters of Putiel, and it's not, you have to know Talmudic reasoning to make sense of this. The yud is extraneous. Harte. Harte is the Aramaic word for two. You can learn two drashot from this because the yud is extraneous, even though it doesn't say that explicitly. Shma mine. Therefore, you can learn two things. So he was the Putiel, links us both to Yitro and to Yosef. So Rashi contracts all of this and says, you reader, you're not thinking about Pinchas here, even though Pinchas is going to come up later on in the genealogy. You're trying to figure out who Putiel is, either Yitro or Yosef, or if you want, reader, you can do both. Okay. So where does that leave us? What do people think of this material about a person that we'll never meet again, that we can't prove, where the linguistic connection is soft? What does it do to the verse? What does it do to the genealogy? Where are we in this story that says that this genealogy is significant? Anybody want to offer any kind of meta concepts on this stuff before we just about finish the genealogy? Okay, let's read the next verse. Leonard. Leonard asks if anyone's ever met a Putiel. I have not. Nor what's the one from last week? A Nefeg. I've never met a Nefeg either. But I don't know. Maybe in my career I'll one day officiate at a bris for a Putiel. Sue?
Well, I can't figure it. It's hard to figure out here if all this talk about Putiel and his history. If the idea is that you have to schlep with you all the baggage of everybody, even if you converted or how do you, it seems like pretty far to go for Mr. Anonymous Putiel.
Yeah.
Meaning what? What do we do with that now? How do we, are we always the grandchild, the great grandchild of the idolater, calf stuffer, how do you get rid of it?
Right, and why do we? And let's say Putiel got that name for one or two of his ancestors, and now we're supposed to imagine that those characteristics passed down to Putiel's daughters, because we're not even talking about Putiel, but his daughters, right? And we're also supposed to imagine that the only reason why it's interesting to us is because maybe those characteristics passed down to the next generation, because it's not until the next generation, the offspring of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, and one of these orders of Putiel, that we're concerned about Pinchas, right? That it'll get down into Pinchas, right? You can make the connection, right, that Eleazar ends up becoming significant in the temple service. So maybe if he had a great grandfather who was named for someone who was a calf stuffer, that's either is a blot on him, that now he's offering animals to God when so previous in his genealogy someone was doing it to idolatry, or maybe he's learned the trade, right? And we already did a little bit of imagining as to how this could impact who Pinchas was, and none of this is resolved because we don't have clear answers to this. Renee.
Maybe it's just as a reminder to us of where the whole idolatry thing came from, so that we don't go back there again.
That it's in our blood somewhere, right? Has anyone in the room done 23andMe or a genealogical search, right? It's interesting to imagine, who is back there. People whose numbers come back, 98% Ashkenazi Jew, 2%. They don't know what, right? Is this from the Khazars in the 13th century? Is this a Cossack raid of a shtetl in the 17th century? And at some point, does it really matter? We are who we are. It is interesting to know a little bit our parents' emotional, psychological, and medical health histories, and maybe our grandparents, but our great-great-grandparents, does it really show up in us? On some level, of course, because everything that is us is genetic, and genes express themselves in certain ways. Clearly, the people this generation were not thinking on a genetic level. Larry?
It could just be our desire sometimes to associate with notoriety.
Yeah.
I have an aunt by marriage who is a daughter of the Purple Gang, which was a notorious gangster operation in Detroit. And I don't shy away from mentioning that.
It explains so much more of you, Larry.
Let us keep going. Let us read verse. Oh, Leonard, we're never going to get off this verse because apparently it creates interference for the people speaking on Zoom.
Okay. So I found another reference over here. It's suggesting here that Putiel is in fact a Hebraized version of Potipharah, the priest of On, whose daughter Joseph married. That's in Genesis 41:45. And it says that the PH being the definite article in Egyptian and the Ra, the Egyptian god.
Right, so maybe there are really stronger connections here with the Yosef side of the story, right? And it's that the Putiel, Potiphar, the Midrashic view may be, connecting him to having controlled his urges, but it may be that we're actually talking about the same family over there. Yeah.
And it's very interesting too, if it's Potiphar Ra, and Ra is the Egyptian god, it's another example of, what's that word again that begins with the T, the
Theophoric.
Theophoric. It's theophoric in the Egyptian sense.
Yeah. Barry?
Well, it just seems that this lineage to the Kobanites, the priests of the temple, our temple, have in their root the struggle between the extremes of spiritual tension, of idol worship, controls one's self, and performance to God.
That's really interesting, Barry, because I hadn't thought about what is narratively shared between the Yitro and the Yosef in this one Rashi called from the text in Bava Batra. And it does reference two of the three biggies when it comes to the Jewish and rabbinic understanding of the worst ways that you can act, right? There are three mitzvot that are considered yehareg v'al ya'avor, that you should give up your life before violating this mitzvah, right? One of them is idolatry. One of them is sexual licentiousness. And the third one is, anyone know? Murder, right? Bloodshed, right? You cannot murder someone else to save your own life. You can murder the person you can kill the person who's trying to kill you, that's self-defense. But we used this example before. If Bill says to me, he's going to kill me unless I murder Larry and Larry's innocent, I cannot murder Larry to save my own life, right? So two of the threes have been represented here, right? Purple Gang, yes. He was going to murder me first. Resisting the urge to give in to one's sexual impulses, and then somehow graduating from idolatry to serving the one God. So two of the three are referenced here, and I hadn't thought about that on a narrative level. Let's at least start the next verse. Who have we not heard from at all today? Anyone who have not heard from at all today? Oh, Rick, your hand is up. Is your hand up, or is it still up?
Yeah, no, I just added it. I just wanted to say all of this would go away if they just gave us the name of Eleazar's wife, like they gave us Yocheved in verse 20 and Elisheva in 23. So there was a reason they didn't want to say the name, and they would rather do Mibnot Putiel. So we would be talking about Putiel. So it's like they just wanted to the author wanted to underline that there's all sorts of history, good and bad, with all of our ancestors, kind of thing. That's all.
The author of the Torah as a they, speaking about for multiplicity of deities, right? And yes, this would all go away, but hasn't this been a fun 47 minutes, right? We don't want this. Good stuff,
right,
okay?
right.
Rachel, do you want to read the next verse? Verse 26.
Hu Aharon uMoshe asher amar Adonai lahem hotziu et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzvaot tzvotam.
Yes, al tzvotam. It's a hard word. There are very few silent letters in Hebrew, but occasionally there's an aleph in there. They're not sure exactly what to do with. Okay, translate that.
Reading again from Sepharia. It is the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. And I'm particularly interested in that military reference.
Yeah.
Troop
Which translation do you know? What translation you're reading? Is it Everett Fox or JPS? Do you know?
It's word for word JPS.
Word for word JPS. Okay, because Sepharia has different translations. So
Everett Fox is by their force.
we think is is what's turned into the same, right? In that JPS translation, it's the same who, right? There's a who here. Horton here's a who. There's a who here that's hard to know how to translate, because first of all, it feels like we're we're continuing from an ellipsis, right? Like, you ever hear someone pick up a story and as you know they were beginning to tell you a while back, and then something interrupted, and all of a sudden they're continuing to tell the story as if there was no interruption. Oh, this is the Aaron and Moshe. What? Who? What are we referring to? And the who is interesting because who is singular, right? So if you had to translate it literally, he is not translated. Aaron and Moshe. That God said to them, bring out the Israelites from the land of Egypt, and then the phrase al tzivotam, right? Look for a second back on chapter 6, verse 13, yes. Going back to before we started this genealogy, which is not that many verses ago, but because we've lingered on some of the stuff, it's a long time ago in our learning of the material. After the encounter where Moshe again speaks about his reticence to take on this job, and he's aral svatayim, how they're going to listen to me. There's a chapter break, or at least there's a parsha break in the Torah's columns after verse 12, but it's not a break in the Christian designation of the beginning of and ending of chapters. Vayidaber Adonai, God said, El Moshe v'el Aaron, to Moses and Aaron, Vayetzavem el bnei Yisrael, we spent a long time in that verse, and he commanded them regarding the children of Israel, V'el Paro, and also regarding Pharaoh, Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt, Lahotzi et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, to get them out of Egypt. And then the next verse is the beginning of the second aliyah of Va'era, Ela Rashi Vayidabatam. Let's remind ourselves who we're talking about here, who they are. It seems to be that the reason why this is introduced is to give us the full picture of the two people who are the main characters in the actual story that's happening. The actual story that's happening is not that people were being born. It's not that Putiel had daughters. The actual story is this: Moses and Aaron are about to go into the lion's den to remove the Israelites from Egypt. We figure out something about them. Back to who are Moshe? These very ones that were mentioned in the above genealogy. And hold on. And while I was doing that genealogy, I also told you about some of their descendants. But it was all about Moshe and Aaron, or yes, Aaron and Moshe. Rashi will comment on that as well. It's the opposite order. The ones to whom God had said, take out the Israelites from the land of Egypt. That's almost an exact quote from verse 13. And adding on to it, al tzivotam. So Rachel, you were commenting about that. What does al mean as a preposition? On or for or regarding. And tzivotam, what's the root? Tzadi bet aleph, right? It does have a military connotation because like tzahal, tzva haganah Yisrael, right? Exactly. Kadosh, 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 na'at tzvaot. So there, is it military? It more seems to be a reference to the coterie of angels, right? I'll read you Eric Fox's translation of this verse, and then we'll have to go into the Rashi's next week. Everett Fox shows how hard this verse is to translate. I wonder if I could bring it up on Safari, but I'm not going to do that. It takes too much time. He says, those, that's the who. And then he adds in parentheses, were they. Those were they. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the wrong verse. That is the Aaron and Moshe to whom God said, bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their forces. He does al tzivotam by their forces. Let's do Rashi on Everett Fox. What do we think Everett Fox means by their forces?
Well, Kaplan says amas, which he then explains in organized groups.
Right. So there are three possible ways of, maybe more, but there are at least three things that the root savah could denote. It could mean military. It could mean large numbers, like God, the God of hosts, like the hosts of angels, and it could have to do with something that is well ordered, well structured, right? And those mean very different things in this verse. And even the al is interesting because the preposition al is not necessarily the preposition we'd expect here. We might have expected the preposition b, like via, by their military or by their numbers or by their ordered groups. We'll hold that as a cliffhanger, because Rashi is going to have a lot to say about this verse and the next verse. So, Putiel, it's been nice hanging out with you. I might live the rest of my life never thinking of you again, but thank you for making our class so interesting today. Have a good day, everybody.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.